Hey guys, here today with Michaela Simone, and today for our podcast episode, we are going to discuss, compare, and apply with some examples Albert Bandura's social learning theory, and then also Evan Pavlov's classical conditioning theory. Okay, so a rundown of our episode today is going to be right here. So first we're going to discuss what both these theories are and give an explanation of them. Then we're going to display them through some examples. And then towards the end, we're going to compare both theories, compare and contrast, see how they're similar, see how they're different. And finally, we're going to end with a conclusion. All right, so we're going to get started with social learning theory. As I said earlier, this was developed by Albert Bandura, and it can be defined as the science of how an individual observes others and takes those observations and adopts that to how they behave and how they respond to things and how they feel about certain things. One huge aspect that I always think about whenever talking about this theory is how individuals older than for example, my age, have always said when working with younger kids, you need to lead by example. That's because these younger kids who don't know any differently are going to take the way that you behave, observe it, and mimic it. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to adopt your behaviors and they're going to act like that. Let's say, for example, in a classroom setting, if we have an observing student and another student who is behaving negatively or behaving in a way that's not acceptable, and a teacher gives that student that's behaving negatively some sort of consequence or negative reinforcement, the observing student is going to put together that those behaviors the consequences is going to be negative, and so therefore the chances of them behaving in that manner are very slim because they see how it affected the other student and what the consequences were to that negative behavior. Next, we're going to touch on classical conditioning theory. This was developed by Evan Pavlov, and this is basically the association of a naturally occurring stimulus with an environmental stimulus. Those associations will create a response that eventually will become conditioned. So the way that Pavlov experimented with this was using a dog and food. So basically, it started off with the dog. Every time the dog saw the food, the dog started to salivate. The food was then associated with a bell, and every time the bell was rung, the dog was going to get fed. Eventually, after time went on, without the sight of the food, if the bell was rung, the dog would start to salivate because the dog associated the food with the bell. So the dog learned that when the bell was going to be rung, he was going to get fed. So this is how these two stimuluses were associated. This theory demonstrates how a conditioned stimulus is associated with an unconditioned stimulus, which would then create a conditioned response. All right, for this next section of our podcast, we're going to get into a real life example for each theory, and hopefully it'll help you guys relate to the theories. All right, let's get into it. An example of social learning theory is, let's say we have a family, 2 parents, a young girl, maybe around 3 to 5 years old, and then a baby sister. The young girl is going to observe the way that her parents nurture her baby sister. Now let's say she has a baby doll. The young girl is going to mimic the way that her parents nurture the baby sibling and nurture her baby doll in the same way that they nurture her baby sister. This is a prime example of learning through observation and mimicking those behaviors and adapting them to the way that you act and the way that you behave and how you act towards others. An everyday example for classical conditioning theory is, say we have a young boy right here, and whenever he first went to get his flu shot, he cried. He cried, it hurt, he didn't like it. The next time he goes to get a flu shot, or just a shot in general, and he sees that needle, without even getting the shot, typically the boy is going to cry because he has the association of the needle with the pain that he had last time. So this is the needle being the conditioned stimulus creates the conditioned response, which was at first an unconditioned response, the crying, is now a conditioned response. And now, even without getting the shot, just the sight of the needle, this boy will most likely cry because of that association and that correlation that he has between the two. All right, we've made it to the compare and contrast section of our episode today. So let's go. Now, these are both major learning theories that are used within young kids, adolescents, adults, your whole life you're learning. And there are a lot of differences between the two. One main difference is the complexity. So, for example, social learning theory deals with much more complex behaviors, where classic conditioning theory is more automatic responses and more simple responses to stimulus. Another main difference is the social environment that both of these learning theories take place in. So obviously, social learning theory is within your social environment and how observing people within those environments, whether they be macro environments or micro environments or whatever the case may be, they are, so the social aspect of the theory is huge, whereas the classic conditioning theory doesn't specifically need to have a social aspect, where it's just a stimulus and a response, and it really does not need to be in a social environment or aspect. Lastly, one main difference is the cognitive element involved in these theories. For social learning theory, the cognitive processes are huge. You have memory, observation, mimicking, motivation. You have all that involved in the observations of others, and where classic conditioning is a stimulus being conditioned and being correlated to another stimulus. So it doesn't have those active cognitive processes included in the theory. Now, the two main similarities of these two theories are very broad, but they're both learning theories, and they both explain how individuals acquire the behaviors that they use and how they think about things and how they demonstrate that with their life. And another similarity is association. Now, for classical conditioning theory, the association is between an environmental stimulus and a neutral stimulus. And it's a lot of a more direct association, but association in social theory, in social learning theory, is sometimes associating, like I said earlier, a negative behavior with a negative reinforcement and observing that happening to someone. And then you make that association between the negative behavior and the negative reinforcement, and then you decide, is that a behavior that I want to, like, is that something that I want to do? Like, is that negative reinforcement something that I want put onto me? All right, y'all made it to the end. Thank you for sticking around. So as we've learned today, we've learned the basic overviews of social learning theory and classical conditioning theory, and we've seen some real life examples, which I hope some of you can relate to and get a better grasp on the theory due to those. And we've also seen how these theories like can be similar in some aspects, but mainly have their differences. So I hope y'all enjoyed. Thank you.